The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Adolf Hitler, leader of a Nazi war machine that came within inches of conquering the world before he died in his bunker in 1945. But new evidence tells another story of his escape to Argentina.
As we got into it, and the more times we visited Argentina, the more people we met in Argentina, the more files we discovered, the more newspaper reports we looked at from the time, it became pretty obvious that the death in the bunker was nothing but, well, fiction. Or maybe somebody died in the bunker, but it wasn't Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler is out of sight, hidden beneath the streets of the city. And when Berlin finally falls, he is gone. Russian forces captured the bunker and claimed Hitler's body was nowhere to be found.
He was a great reporter, Paris bureau chief before the war. Cadet, when he got there with the Russians, said they'd been handed 6 doubles of Hitler, and none of them were actually Hitler.
Even more mysteriously, dictator Joseph Stalin maintained until his own death that Hitler had gotten away. In 1968, the Russians changed their account of his death, saying they had evidence to prove Hitler had died in the bunker. What they didn't reveal until decades later was that they had buried the bodies at a military compound in Magdeburg, Germany. The bodies remained there for 2 decades, until 1970, when they were dug up again. The mainstream belief is that the Russians then cremated the remains and scattered the ashes in the Elbe River. Then in 1993, came another shocking twist to the official Russian account, when they revealed they had physical proof of Hitler's death hidden away in Moscow. And even more significantly, a piece of skull with a bullet hole in it. The Russians have always restricted access to the evidence, and it has never been tested using modern forensic technology. Intense negotiations with state officials have resulted in Mystery Quest being granted 1 day's access to examine the evidence. The archive is refusing to grant him the agreed-to access. Heated negotiations take place off-camera. Finally, the Russians relent. But Bellantoni will get just 60 minutes to examine all the documents and gather samples needed for testing.
But American archaeologist Nick Bellantoni and geneticist Linda Strasbaugh say the skull actually belongs to a woman under 40 years old.
That it was a woman's skull and not a man's skull. And that, folks, is forensic evidence. It's not like the assumption they made in the first place, that it was a Hitler skull with a bullet hole through it. That was an assumption, like the archaeologist said, from Connecticut. And these tests were done at the University of Connecticut to determine, that's where the DNA tests were done. So that this is not assumption. They actually had pieces of the skull. They brought it back. They did the DNA test. They not only proved it. They not only found DNA, but they also were able to profile it and find out that it was a woman's skull.
I don't know why people didn't go after them. One, he was dead, so I suppose, why bother? And secondly, it took almost 11.5 years for the Americans to find bin Laden. In the Andes, along that range, is the place where Hitler first went to. It was his first point of refuge in Argentina after he'd arrived on the coast. It's deep inland.
Al edificio a hablar con Pavelli, venía caminando con los 3 guardaespaldas y la señora. Prácticamente lo traían caminando, ¿no?
Catalina Gomero spent weeks in 1948 waiting on him in 2 properties owned by the Eichhorn family in Cordoba, at La Falda and Pan Azucar. She would take phone calls from him until 1962, 17 years after his alleged suicide in Berlin. At 3 p.m. on the 13th of February 1962, tormented, demented, and betrayed, the most evil man of the 20th century finally died. We were lied to.